Video here for you that you can literally practice along to. Concepts we talked about a lot today with our blues licks, just starting with left hand. It seemed like you were in good shape. We talked about, advancing into box two, how when we're moving forward, we're going to use our middle finger so that we're right in this position. And we don't really do this that much except when we're literally going and going back, not going to this side of it. When I'm advancing, I use my middle finger, but then when I'm going back down, I use my ring finger, and they both achieve the same thing, which is I'm moving up and I end up right in position to play. I move back and I end up right in position to play. We talked about, and I'm just using A minor pentatonic. So other stuff, is like this whole thing that's happening with you, with your index finger, where it sounds all really staccato. We talked about how right hand wise that's a product of this thing, where you're coming right back to the strings as a function of your position. So I'm really going to suggest that you just make a relaxed fist and approach it like little strums. If you're doing this literally while you're playing on the low strings, that's not going to let your subconscious hit the first string next, because you're sitting there like anchoring on it, though I know this has all been happening on a subconscious level. So yeah, what we're doing here is we're working on percussive stuff. Ultimately, I'd like you to take the stuff that we learned from Hendrix and interject it into your blues phrasing. So that's the big project, is like be soloing and then do that instead of just all single note, single note. That's why we worked on this stuff, was to get you in the direction of doing stuff that's going to force you into the other technique. So, we did Hendrix stuff, but the bigger picture is go home, do your normal backing track stuff, try to use a more wrist-oriented hand movement, and actually, just be doing what the normal stuff I do and shit, and then actually do that or whatever, and have it sound correctly. We talked about playing in, pentatonic 5, or behind the box, as I usually refer to it. And, most of the time it's either just this, or, some kind of, where we just use those 4 notes. But if we wanted to play across the whole thing, we would use just ring finger here too, so that we could bend or that we could advance into the box rather than being on our pinky, where we'd have to reorient when we got there. So there you go. But that's it. It's going to take a long time to find somebody actually playing through that box all across all 6 strings. That's pretty easy. And like I said a lot during the lesson, this uncomfortable fingering, it's the same exact thing that we're used to doing there. So, if you kind of just think about it as like that, this part is the same exact hand movement as starting on the 4th string in your main box, then it won't seem as strange to do. Cool, so there's our, blues related stuff, and, we're at like 3 minutes in your video now. Turned out that we ended up doing a bunch of Hendrix licks. Again, the reason we ended up doing this was so that the nature of the licks would force you into having to play legato and use this wider range of motion where you're going down and away, which is impossible in this position. And that's why we're doing this. Obviously, we didn't set out to have a Hendrix workshop. It just turned out you already knew Castles Made of Sand, and we did this one thing here where we went. So there's our first thing, the thing before I drew the first line, and I tend to separate things into riffs, not bars. So yeah, we hit a bass note, which we can pretty much just stop doing, because the part you're actually focusing on is this. Looking at my right hand, another reason we started with this one is because it's all downs, which is going to be more natural for you. So yeah, I'm going 2 strings at a time, the whole way. And, down and away, down and away. And if I was actually doing this, I'd be like, yeah, just, there it is, more wrist involvement, not just all like this sweep picking style. That's what's going on for you, and we want to be more, if I'm on the high strings, totally I'm in this position, but then when I move down, the rest of the hand comes along so that we can do percussive things. So, and let's pretend the concept of rhythm doesn't exist. Make sure you're not looking at the page. It's just a list of things. You're just going over, looking at your hands, going, making sure that we hear, but also and we want to hear both of them with equal volume, when you get good at, so stop and get good at that. I mean, like, pause your video. Now let's try it with down up. Go, which would happen plenty of the time to try alternate strumming it, like you're playing rhythm guitar. You know, if you want to hit this note, you can, but then we're going down up, just to kind of try it in a more like swung context, and that's also something that you're gonna be totally used to doing from rhythm guitar. Like, you know, it's like that same movement we're playing. Anyway, so there's our first riff, and we're at about 5:30 here, where we're getting to what he does next. And I want you to really be sick at that first riff, which is very short, before you try this next riff, because that's how we're doing this. We're building it where if you finish the first thing, the next thing's going to be easier. Now he's on 1, 2, 3 strings, like an A shape. You know, bing, 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 here an A still, A minor. And he hits 3 strings and he hammers on in the middle. So we're going to hear turn into, so there's that, and just work on that on its own, getting, you know, all 3 strings to hit equal volume. Get good at that. And then he goes just index, and then there we go. So you know, it was this. Cool. So that was in reality putting that together with, so stop and just work on that. Don't start at the beginning of the riff. Now we're going to start at the beginning of the riff, having just worked on that. So now we're going. I deliberately did this like down tempo because that's going to give you more, you know. And again, right now we're trying to be in our conscious focused headspace, not our guessing headspace. And then it ends with this. Cool. So there's our Hendrix part 1. Castles Made of Sand. I'm not going to go over the whole thing because you do most of it correctly. The one thing was that the next note there is our first finger again, and that's a thing that we don't guess enough, is that subconsciously that would go the same finger twice in a row. We tend to assume seesaw, seesaw, like, you know, there's a Hendrix riff where I was like same finger. So yeah, you know, that's kind of a function of why our brain didn't want it to be that here. So there's the first riff, and it's all single notes. Cool. Then we're going what you were doing correctly, left hand wise, but here we're just going 2 strings, and it's a hammer on pull off, so that was just bink, and then coming to this, you know, 9/7 like that. So without worrying about the rhythm, try to just do those like they're 2 events that occur in your conscious headspace, taking however long it takes. Cool. Then the next thing he does is this super staccato sus chord, you know, it's the same anchor. Then we go, and we want that to sound like that, which we can hear in the record he does, not like, which we would totally do sometimes. So yeah. And then we've got our, and right there, wanting to hear just as much as. So that has, and that's what sounds cool when he does it. Again, relaxed hand, I'm just going to keep in mind you have that. So, and then the rest of it, just do that same exact shit, you know? And like I said on the page, I want you to approach Castles Made of Sand like it's just a series of riffs that are all little separate exercises. Get good at them, pause in between, and then ultimately, when you can play them all, start stringing them together. Because it does happen really quickly in that. It's like you do this, you do that. It's a bunch of shit happening where it'll behoove us to learn each little bit and then string it together rather than trying to do the whole thing. So we're departing from our approach of finish as we go and just working through it one bit at a time. Main point is like looking at your hand and getting used to being in the, you know, better juxtaposition and more hand movement over here. So there's our Hendrix shit that we talked about. And then that kind of sums it up. So, like, you know, but what's implied in this, like I said earlier, is that, you know, now sit down, try to solo, be content to like really play badly and try to interject these kinds of things into your melodic playing. You know, be doing your normal, this is the shit that I do, and then try to find ways to work it in. Or you can start with, and then switch to single notey or whatever. That's what's implied in all this. That's really the reason we did this, was so that you could start to generate ideas where it sounds more legato as a product of the fact that we're going to stuff like, that's 2 strings at a time. When we hear Stevie Ray, he's doing this stuff even when he's playing single notes, which is really hard, and I'm not suggesting we try that, but you know, that's what we're after, is this more thing. If it ever feels like, man, my hand's gonna like explode, I don't get it, play some rhythm guitar. Just like strum some chords in first position, and then try to apply that to what we were just doing, like more like that type situation. You know, when this is like supposed to be a pain in the balls, and that's why it's what we're focusing on. So can't emphasize strongly enough, just work in small sections and finish as you go. It doesn't really matter if you play it up to tempo. It doesn't really matter if you string all the licks from Castles Made of Sand together, because the whole point is to learn each one. And like, we only did Castles Made of Sand because you already know it. And it has a lot of these same things in it. Long run, there's way more bluesy single note stuff and delta things that we want to work on. This just attacked the immediate technique stuff that we wanted to fix, so that's why we ended up having like the Hendrix Symposium. And if you look back through my YouTube, if you just click like the channel, there's a shit ton of lessons of me teaching other stuff, and you could like find a Freddie King one or something like that. Feel free to take any of the other lessons if you want.